The auctioneer's voice cracked across the dry afternoon air like a whip. Dust rose from the boots of men gathered beneath the faded wooden awning of the county foreclosure yard just outside Abilene. The sky stretched wide and merciless above them, pale blue and empty. "Next lot," the auctioneer shouted. "Ranch equipment, livestock rights, and associated property transfer." The word property hung heavier than it should have. Leon Jo stood very still. Her black dress, once elegant, was now creased from days of travel and nights without sleep. A thin silk scarf covered her hair, though the Texas wind kept tugging it loose. Beside her boots sat a single suitcase. Everything she owned now fit inside it. 3 months ago, she had lived in a glass tower overlooking the lights of Shanghai. 3 months ago, she had been the wife of Wei Zhou, a shipping magnate whose companies stitched trade routes across oceans. Then his plane went down over the Pacific, and the board of directors decided a foreign widow with limited English was bad for business. Assets froze, accounts locked, lawyers circled. By the time Leon understood what was happening, the empire her husband built had been sliced apart like butchered meat. One remaining investment remained tangled in her name. A struggling cattle ranch in Texas her husband had purchased quietly 2 years before. A diversification experiment, he had called it. Now it was debt, and debts in West Texas were settled publicly. The auctioneer glanced toward her, not unkind, just practical. "All liabilities transfer with purchase." A murmur rippled through the small crowd of ranchers. "She part of it?" someone muttered. "Came with the land," another replied. Leon didn't understand every word, but she understood tone. Her spine straightened. Across the yard, a tall man leaned against a fence post, hat tipped low over steady eyes. He hadn't spoken once. Dust clung to his boots. His shirt sleeves were rolled to reveal forearms lined by sun and labor. His name was Caleb Turner, and he hadn't planned to bid on anything that day. He ran a modest ranch 40 miles south, kept to himself, fixed his own fences, buried his wife 5 winters ago, and never quite found reason to fill the house again. But when he'd heard the Joe property was collapsing, he'd driven up out of curiosity. He hadn't expected to see her. The auctioneer raised his gavel. "Opening bid." Numbers flew back and forth. Low. Predatory. They weren't bidding for prosperity. They were bidding for scraps. Leanne's hands tightened at her sides. If the ranch sold too low, the remaining debt would still follow her. She would lose everything and still owe. 10,000, someone barked. Caleb's jaw tightened. The land alone was worth triple. They were circling like coyotes. 15, 16. Silence hovered. The auctioneer scanned the yard. "Going once?" 25. The voice cut clean through the heat. Heads turned. Caleb stepped forward, removing his hat slowly. 25,000. The murmurs sharpened. He wasn't known for reckless spending. The bidding faltered. No one wanted to overpay for land tangled in foreign paperwork and whispered scandal. "Going twice." Dust swirled. "Sold." The gavel struck wood. Just like that, it was done. Leanne felt the world tilt slightly. She looked at the tall rancher who had just altered her fate with 2 quiet words. He signed the preliminary sheet without flourish. No triumph, no smirk, just steady ink on paper. When he finished, he approached her. Up close, she saw the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. Not cruel lines, weather lines. "You understand what happens now?" he asked carefully. His English was slow, deliberate. She swallowed. "You paid for ranch and its liabilities." She held his gaze, something fierce flickering beneath grief. "That includes me." A long pause stretched between them. Texas wind rustled the auction papers. Finally, she stepped closer, voice trembling but unbroken. "You paid for me. Now do it." Several men nearby shifted uncomfortably. Caleb's eyes hardened, not at her, but at the implication behind the words. I didn't buy a person, he said evenly. I bought land. You bought debt, she replied. I am debt. The raw honesty of it landed heavy. For a moment he saw not a foreign widow from a distant empire, but a woman cornered by a system that devoured the weak. What do you think I'm supposed to do? He asked quietly. She lifted her chin despite the tremor in her hands. Finish it. End it. Remove liability. Understanding dawned. She thought he might discard her, deport her, hand her to creditors, or worse. Caleb exhaled slowly through his nose. You're not livestock. I have nowhere, she said, the words finally cracking. If I go back, they erase me. If I stay, I owe more than I can pay. Silence settled. The other ranchers drifted away, discomfort outweighing curiosity. Soon only dust and distant cattle sounds filled the yard. Caleb studied her suitcase, one handle frayed. You know anything about ranching? He asked. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. No. Good. She blinked. Means you won't argue when I tell you how it works. He nodded toward his truck. You're coming with me. Her breath caught. As what? He paused, choosing words carefully. As someone who doesn't belong to anybody. The statement seemed to hit her harder than any insult could have. She stood frozen. Unless, he added quietly, you'd rather stay here and let the vultures decide. Her gaze drifted across the emptying yard. The men who had whispered, the lawyers who had avoided her eyes. Then back to him, the lone rancher who had just spent more money than sense dictated. She picked up her suitcase. The drive south stretched long and quiet. Flat land rolled beneath endless sky. After miles of silence, she spoke. Why? He kept his eyes on the road. Why what? Why pay more? He shrugged slightly. Land deserved better. And me? A longer pause. Still deciding. The honesty didn't wound her. It steadied her. The Turner Ranch emerged near sunset, fencing strong, barn weathered but solid, cattle grazing slow under gold light. The house stood simple, white paint slightly faded, porch wide enough for 2 chairs and quiet evenings. Caleb parked. This is it. She stepped out, boots touching Texas soil that now, by law, was tied to her fate. He carried her suitcase without comment and set it just inside the doorway. You can take the spare room, he said. We'll figure paperwork tomorrow. She lingered on the threshold. You are not afraid? She asked. Of what? Of what people say. A faint shadow crossed his expression. People been saying things about me since my wife died. They'll survive one more story. The sun dipped low. Leanne stood in the doorway of a stranger's house, on land bought with the last of her dignity, unsure whether she had been rescued or simply postponed. Behind them, wind moved through the tall grass like a whisper. And for the first time since the auction gavel fell, she felt something unfamiliar. Not safety, not trust, but possibility. The word lingered in Leanne's mind as the screen door creaked shut behind her. The sound was small, ordinary, yet it felt like a line being drawn between 2 worlds, one that had erased her and one that had not decided what to do with her yet. The house smelled faintly of cedar and black coffee. It wasn't large. A worn leather couch faced a stone fireplace. Boots rested neatly by the door. A single framed photograph sat on the mantel. A woman with kind eyes and wind-tangled hair, smiling beside the same quiet rancher who now stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter. My wife, Caleb said, noticing her gaze. Anna. Leanne bowed her head slightly out of instinctive respect. She is gone? 5 years. A silence settled that wasn't sharp, just honest. He cleared his throat. Kitchen's through there, bathrooms down the hall. If you need anything, you ask, not beg. The last 2 words were firm, not cruel. She nodded once. I do not beg. But they both knew she had. That night she lay awake in the spare bedroom, staring at a ceiling fan that turned in slow circles. The bed was simple but clean. The sheets smelled of sun-dried cotton. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. The sound should have frightened her. Instead, it felt raw and real, like this land didn't pretend to be gentle. Back in Shanghai, danger had worn suits and smiles. Here, it announced itself. Morning came before she was ready. At 5 sharp, boots thudded past her door. She rose quickly, pulling on the only practical clothes she owned, dark slacks and a loose sweater. When she stepped into the kitchen, Caleb was already pouring coffee. "You wake early," she observed. "Cows don't sleep in," he replied. She hesitated. "What do I do?" He studied her for a moment. "You ever held a shovel?" Her chin lifted slightly. "Yes." "Good. Fence lines down near the east pasture." The work was brutal. The Texas sun climbed fast, burning away the morning cool. Her hands blistered within the hour. By noon, sweat soaked through fabric that had once belonged in air-conditioned boardrooms. Caleb watched without hovering. Twice she stumbled. Twice she stood back up without a word. By late afternoon, her palms were raw and bleeding. He finally stepped closer. "That's enough." She shook her head. "Debt is not light." "You're not working off a debt." She met his gaze, breath uneven. "Then what am I doing?" His jaw flexed. "Earning a place." The words hit differently than she expected. Not ownership, not obligation. A place. Days turned into weeks. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the feeding schedules, the stubborn temperament of June the brown mare, the way storms rolled in without warning. She burned dinner twice, fixed a fence wrong once, argued about feed costs when she discovered receipts in a drawer. "You overspend," she said bluntly one evening, spreading them papers across the kitchen table. He raised a brow. "You read English contracts now?" "I ran international shipping accounts," she replied coolly. "Your supplier is cheating you." He leaned over the table, shoulder brushing hers as they studied the numbers. For the first time, something like partnership flickered between them. Within a month, she renegotiated the feed contract. Within 2, she reorganized inventory. Within 3, profits steadied. The ranch began to breathe easier, but peace rarely lasted. One afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the dirt drive, dust swirling behind it. Leanne froze on the porch. She recognized the emblem on the door. Joe International Holdings. Her late husband's former board members stepped out in pressed suits that didn't belong anywhere near cattle country. Caleb stepped beside her without being asked. "Afternoon," he said evenly. The tallest of the men adjusted his tie. "Mrs. Joe, we've come to discuss unfinished matters." "There are no matters," she replied, voice steady despite the storm rising inside her chest. The man smiled thinly. "On the contrary, you signed certain residual guarantees before your husband's passing." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You got paperwork. You hand it to me." The man ignored him. "Return with us to Shanghai, publicly dissolve claims, sign control to the board. In exchange, we clear outstanding debt." Translation: surrender what little dignity remained. Caleb stepped forward, boots planting firm in the dirt. "She's not property." The board member's gaze sharpened. "You misunderstand. She is an asset." The word ignited something cold and dangerous behind Caleb's calm exterior. "She's not leaving." Silence thickened. Leanne's pulse pounded. Part of her wanted to run. Another part wanted to fight. The suited men exchanged glances. "Very well," the leader said smoothly. "Then we will pursue this legally. And when we do, this ranch will not survive the scrutiny." They turned and left, dust swallowing their retreat. Evening settled heavy and quiet. Leanne stood staring at the horizon long after the SUV disappeared. "They will not stop," she said softly. "Neither will I," Caleb replied. She turned to him, something fierce rising in her eyes. If they take this place because of me, they won't. You cannot know that. He faced her fully now. You think I paid that money just to watch someone scare you off? Emotion tightened her throat. Why? The question had followed them since the auction. Why had he stepped forward? Why had he taken the risk? Why her? He removed his hat slowly, the same deliberate motion from the day he raised his hand. Because when you said, "You paid for me, now do it," you weren't asking to be owned. He stepped closer. You were daring someone not to treat you like you were disposable. Her breath caught. And I don't quit on people who fight that hard to stay standing. The wind moved through the tall grass behind them, softer now. For the first time since the gavel fell in that dusty yard outside Abilene, Leanne Jo felt something stronger than survival. Not debt, not obligation, belonging. And as the sun dipped below the Texas horizon, casting gold across land once nearly lost, she understood something neither boardrooms nor auctions had ever taught her. She had not been bought. She had been chosen.